This is not 1986. Selective memory loss seems to be at work in the Senate today, and I'd like to respond to some of these claims by my colleagues. On one hand, critics of the immigration bill keep harking back to the Immigration Control Act of 1986, commonly known as IRCA, arguing that we haven't learned the lessons of 1986. On the other hand, they insist on their slogan of securing the border first before a legalization process can begin. But if there are lessons to be learned from 1986, there are just as many to be learned from the last 10 years in which enforcement first has been the mantra of Congress's immigration policy with disastrous results. First, with respect to 1986, the overriding lesson was learned from that bill was that if you don't deal with the reasons people come to the United States, you don't solve the problem. A promise to end illegal immigration ultimately couldn't be fulfilled because the 1986 law did not address the question of future immigration flows. The Migration Policy Institute and the Immigration Policy Center have identified one cause of future illegal immigration after IRCA to be not legalization, but the failure of the legislation to address future flows of immigration. S-744, the bill that we are debating, however, does not follow in the failed footsteps of the 1986 Act and addresses future flow in real and meaningful ways. But we have learned other lessons in the intervening years, most notably that the quote-unquote enforcement first policy does not serve our country well. Despite an extraordinary allocation of resources and personnel, the flow of illegal immigrants has steadfastly been affected more by the economy than by enforcement efforts. As deportations have gone up at the same time, the tragic impact on families and children have been well documented, and the impact on the economy continues to grow. So if one of the pull factors is the opportunity to earn money to send back to your family, S-744 undermines that opportunity by mandating a universal employment verification system and provides for a reasonable implementation schedule. What that basically means is that every employer in America virtually was going to have to make sure that regardless of who you are, that when you come forth and you seek to be employed by an employer who has a job available, they're going to go through the system and verify whether you have the legal status to be able to work in the United States. That undermines that factor of drawing people to this country for employment opportunity much more than anything else about interdiction. If anything, the growing outrage over a broken immigration system helped to change the political dynamic last year. It was a rejection of both the enforcement-only strategy and the idea that we must secure the border first. Finally, the Migration Policy Institute explained that the 86 Act limited legalization program left many people in the shadows, which led to substantial backlogs in family-based immigration categories. Illegal immigration did not decrease dramatically until after the passage of enforcement-only bills started in 1996 that trapped many in an undocumented status despite their family or employment ties. So our legislation learns from the mistakes of the past and creates a balanced 21st century immigration system. Now, despite what many have said, our legislation in moving forward with legalization does not, however, abandon border security, but rather addresses it in tandem with the significant problems that face our immigration system. We can, for example, reap enormous benefits from legalizing the undocumented, both in terms of their economic contributions, making sure that they fully pay taxes and are law-abiding in every other respect, and in terms of creating a more secure and accountable system, as we will know who is in the United States and who can lawfully work here, but we can't do it if we have to wait years under some of the amendments our colleagues are offering to begin the process of transitioning undocumented people into a legal status. Now, I've heard a lot about national security. Well, I would prefer to know who is here in the United States. Let them come forth, register with the government, go through a criminal background check, and those who can't pass that background check, maybe they don't think their background's going to come up, they get deported. But then I know who is here to do harm to America versus who is here to pursue the American dream. But my colleagues would continue through their amendments to keep these people in the shadows, millions. And therefore, I don't know how you promote national security if you don't know who is here and for what purposes. So we reap enormous benefits, both in terms of economic benefits as well as security, by bringing those people out of the shadows into the light, registering with the government, going through a criminal background check, paying taxes, learning English, and earning your way to make your situation right in the United States. Now, certain impossible border security standards must be seen for what they are, which in my view is a cynical attempt to deny a pathway to legalization. You can flower it all you want, you can cover it up all you want, you can put all the lipstick on it you want, but it is still what it is. It is a cynical attempt to ultimately undermine a pathway to legalization. Standards that some of my colleagues are trying to propose have not been met by the federal government in virtually any other responsibility that the government has. Pretty amazing. Tying the two together, as so many have tried to do, is simply institutionalizing the status quo. And what does the status quo do? The status quo allows millions to be in this country without knowing what their purpose is here. The status quo allows families to be divided. The status quo allows U.S. citizens and permanent residents, legal permanent residents of the United States, to be unlawfully detained in immigration raids, treated as second-class citizens of this country because of the happenstance of where they live, who they are, what they look like. Who among us is willing to be a second-class citizen in America? The status quo permits an underclass to be exploited and create downward pressures on the wages of all Americans, and that exploitation takes place. The status quo doesn't allow for the challenges, even in a tough job economy, to be fulfilled so that our economy can grow. Because I listen to all different sectors of our economy, the agricultural sector. I listen to the seafood industry. I listen to the hospitality industry. I listen to the restaurant industry. I listen to the high-tech industry. And they clamor for individuals to do these critical jobs that very often support the high-paying jobs above them, but are essential in order to be able to produce that product or deliver that service. But no, we would have the status quo be preserved, because that is what, in essence, the amendments that are being offered, that are unattainable standards that simply, my colleagues know, cannot be met, that are really not about border security, but about undermining the pathway to legalization. So let's look at what this bill does do, however, about border security, among many other provisions. It includes $6.5 billion in addition to the greatest amount of resources, money, border patrol, custom enforcement, physical impediments on the border, aerial surveillance that already exist, it adds $6.5 billion to bolster our border security efforts. That is in addition to the annual appropriations for border security. Effective border controls? Yes. As a matter of fact, these provisions in the Gang of Eight were largely drafted by the senators who came from border states and who had a real sense and a real conversation with those who secure the border every day about what was needed. It requires all employers to verify their workers are authorized to work in this country, which cuts off the job magnet. Another effective control, perhaps the most effective control. It has a whole entry-exit system that is far more advanced than that which exists today. And before any legalization can begin, the Secretary of Homeland Security is designated to come up with a plan for how to deploy $4.5 billion of those $6.5 billion resources on infrastructure, technology, fencing, personnel such as the Border Patrol, so that they'll be able to catch 9 out of every 10 undocumented immigrants that might attempt to cross the border. So there's more border controls. And only after this plan has been presented to the Congress and the E-Verify system, which is that employment check, is ready for nationwide implementation, and that the deployment of the resources has commenced, may the legalization program begin to adjust undocumented individuals to that provisional status. And before anyone in that provisional status can ever be granted a green card, which basically means permanent resident, all of the resources in the plan must be deployed on the ground and be working. No, it's not enough for some of my colleagues because they create standards for which you, in essence, could never, ever have even a provisional status in the country. Some senators have also claimed that our bill allows immigrants to receive welfare and other public benefits. That's just simply not true. S-744, the bill before us, bars individuals granted even provisional status and blue card status, which are ag workers, and V non-immigrant visas. They will not be eligible for the following federal means-tested public benefit programs for the duration of their provisional status: non-emergency Medicaid, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, otherwise known as SNAP or food stamps, temporary assistance for needy families, TANF, supplementary security income. In fact, when most of these individuals adjust to LPR green card status, they will be forced to wait at least 5 additional years before becoming eligible for these programs, all the while they are paying taxes, which is a prerequisite. As a result, an individual with RPI status who is otherwise eligible for public benefits would not be able to enroll in programs such as Medicaid and SNAP for 15 years. Now, during the duration of their provisional status, individuals will not be eligible for the Affordable Care Act's premium tax credits and cost-sharing reductions that help make health insurance affordable for low and middle-income working families. They will not be eligible for that. Individuals granted RPI, the provisional status, blue card or V, non-immigrant visa status, will be able to purchase private health insurance at full cost. At full cost, without subsidies, without tax credits, to the insurance marketplaces created under the Affordable Care Act. And we certainly want to give them the opportunity out of their own pocket in full cost to be able to do so if they can, because that means that we lessen the burden on our healthcare system, particularly in an emergency room setting. which is what happens right now. This doesn't give tax credits, doesn't give subsidies, but says to the individual, if you have the wherewithal, go buy insurance and protect yourself. This bill denies benefits to legalized immigrants. It's a tough bill. And frankly, for many of us, some of these provisions, because we say to someone, come forth, register, pay fines, pay fees, pay your taxes, and by the way, for a decade or more, even though you're paying taxes like anybody else, you have absolutely no right to anything. That's virtually what we're saying. So I wanted to clarify the record so the American people understand the truth about this bill. It's a tough and fair compromise that respects the American taxpayer. Finally, I'd like to clarify the record about taxes and the economic benefits of this bill. This bill increases the gross domestic product of the United States by a cumulative $832 billion over 10 years. $832 billion over 10 years. And that's only by virtue of looking at the legalization aspect. If we look at the totality of all the elements of the bill, it exceeds $1 trillion. It increases the wages of all Americans by $470 billion. And it creates an average of 121,000 new jobs each year for the next 10 years. That's an additional 1.2 million jobs over the next decade. The Senate bill says that individuals who don't pay their taxes cannot renew their legal status or obtain green cards. Legalizing immigrants can be required to pay assessed taxes going back as far as 10 years before legalization. This requirement is tougher than the back tax requirements in the 2006 and the 2007 bipartisan Senate immigration bills, which only required legalizing workers to pay back taxes when they obtained their green cards. Under this bill, workers are held responsible for back taxes at 3 points: when first transitioning to legal status, when renewing their status, and when obtaining a green card. On top of the back tax requirement, legalizing workers will have to pay significant penalties and fees at registration and renewal and when obtaining their green cards. Everyone who works, regardless of their immigration status, is liable for the payment of taxes. Assessed liability simply means that legalizing workers will be held responsible for all the back taxes the IRS says they owe. All the back taxes the IRS says they owe, going back as far as 10 years before legalization. The back tax requirement is written in the way that is most straightforward for the IRS to implement and enforce, saving resources and making sure that individuals with past due liability can actually be blocked from adjusting their status. It provides an efficient way for the Department of Homeland Security to confirm that individuals have satisfied their tax liabilities. It's much easier for the Department of Homeland Security to work with IRS to confirm that individuals have paid all their assessed liabilities instead of sifting through tens of millions of tax returns which do not reflect taxes that may have been assessed by the IRS. You know, I look at the Congressional Budget Office, we'll await their score, but they and other experts in the past have found that undocumented workers will pay billions of dollars more in taxes, once they come out of the shadows and work legally. So, Mr. President, you know, I had thought that in poll after poll after poll, where both Democrats and Republicans and independents said they wanted to see this broken immigration system fixed, where in fact we had a national election last November for the presidency, for the Congress, in which this debate raged on quite a bit. And ultimately, a new demographic in the country showed in those election results as they marched to the polls that they were looking at how this Congress would deal with the question of reforming our broken immigration system. That, in fact, we'd have a different day here in the Senate. That instead of voices that are seeking to undermine the very essence of reform that includes border security, that includes a pathway to legalization, that includes provisions in our economy that are incredibly important both to grow and not suppress the wages of Americans, that improves the protections to make sure that American workers have the first shot at getting any job that exists in America, first and foremost, that looks at the future in terms of flows and says, this is how we're going to deal with this to ensure that our economic vitality grows by the virtue of who we allow in this country. But that still preserves a very core value, an American value, a value I've often heard my colleagues talk about, which is about family values and the family unit. Well, that still preserves the very essence of that value, even as it reduces it somewhat, and at the same time preserves our history as a nation of immigrants, the greatest experiment in the history of mankind, which has made us the greatest country on the face of the earth, that we'd hear a different approach by some of our colleagues. But I've heard the same tired refrain, and it may sound good, but when you read what the amendments are all about, you understand what they're really trying to do. And I believe that those efforts will be rejected. Legitimate efforts to improve this bill, as they were improved in the Senate Judiciary Committee, in which 136 amendments were offered and passed, many of them Republican amendments, many of them bipartisan amendments, were passed. And they, in fact, refined, improved, made more specific elements of the bill that were great additions. Those opportunities exist here as well. But what we can't allow is to nullify the hopes and dreams and aspirations of millions of people in our country who are waiting for this moment. We cannot nullify the opportunity to really move towards securing our country in a way far beyond the status quo. We cannot lose the opportunity to grow our economy, get more taxpayers into our system, and strengthen our overall revenue sources. That's what this bill is all about. And that's why I believe at the end of the day that it will prevail and receive the votes necessary to move forward and send to the House so we can finally get this broken immigration system fixed. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor and observe the absence of a quorum.